The Bensons were the picture-perfect family. Mr. Benson, a successful businessman. His wife, Sharon, a glamorous event planner. And their two children, Becky and Paul, both excelling in school and adored by their peers. They lived in a luxurious duplex in Lekki, where the streets were adorned with sparkling lights, in celebration of Christmas. Preparations for Christmas were in full swing in the Benson household. Sharon was busy overseeing decorators who transformed their house into a winter wonderland, with a towering Christmas tree shimmering with gold and red ornaments. Becky and Paul excitedly wrapped gifts, their laughter filling the air. Even Mr. Benson, who was always swamped with work, had taken time off to spend the holiday with his family. But amidst the joy, their next-door neighbor, Madame Juliana, watched with narrowed eyes. A widow living in a much smaller bungalow, she had always harbored resentment toward the Bensons. Their happiness reminded her of her own loneliness, and their prosperity fueled her bitterness. As she stood by her window, glaring at the Benson family's laughter, an idea began to form in her mind, a way to ruin their Christmas. Madame Juliana's hatred for the Bensons didn't start overnight. It had brewed for years, ever since she moved into the neighborhood. She had tried befriending Sharon once, but Sharon's polite distance and refusal to engage in neighborhood gossip irritated her. Over time, Juliana began to see Sharon's kindness as arrogance and her family's success as undeserved. On Christmas Eve, Juliana sat in her poorly lit living room, nursing a cup of stale tea. Her walls were bare, and the only decorations she could afford were a few plastic garlands, strung haphazardly across her window. The laughter and music from the Benson's house filtered through the night air, deepening her bitterness. She decided it was time to act. For weeks, she had been preparing a gift for the Bensons, a gift unlike any other. She placed a small wrapped box on her table, muttering incantations under her breath. The object inside the box wasn't ordinary. It carried a curse, one that promised to shatter the happiness she so despised. Christmas morning was a joyous affair in the Benson household. Sharon and Becky were in the kitchen, preparing jollof rice, fried chicken, and other delicacies, while Paul and Mr. Benson arranged presents under the tree. As the family gathered to open gifts, a knock on the door interrupted their moment. When Paul opened the door, he found no one there, only a small, neatly wrapped box sitting on the doormat. The box was adorned with a red ribbon and bore a tag that read, "For the Bensons, Merry Christmas." There was no indication of who sent it, but the family assumed it was from a well-wisher. They curiously opened the box, only to find an intricately carved wooden ornament shaped like a star. It seemed harmless and beautiful. "How thoughtful," Sharon says, placing the ornaments on the tree. They didn't know the sinister power it held or the terror it would unleash. That night, the Bensons' household didn't feel the same. The festive atmosphere was replaced by a strange silence. Becky woke up screaming, claiming she saw a shadowy figure in her room. Mr. Benson dismissed it as a nightmare, but the trouble lingered. By morning, the family discovered something chilling. The Christmas tree ornaments had been rearranged into a chaotic, disturbing pattern. The star from the mysterious gift was now at the very top, glowing faintly. Sharon shivered as she looked at it, but Mr. Benson assured her it was just a prank by one of the kids. Down the street, Madame Juliana smiled wickedly to herself. The spell is working, and this is only the beginning, she says. As the day progressed, more strange incidents occurred. The power flickered constantly, leaving the family in darkness at odd moments. The delicious jollof rice Sharon had cooked turned sour, and she couldn't explain why. Becky's favorite doll went missing, only to be found in the fireplace, burnt to ashes. Paul, usually a brave and lively boy, began complaining of hearing whispers in his room. "Someone keeps calling my name, Mommy," he said, trembling. Sharon felt a chill run down her spine. It was no longer possible to dismiss these events as coincidences. Jude, their cheerful driver, entered the house carrying groceries but abruptly froze. His expression turned grave as he pointed at the star ornament. "Madame, this thing is not ordinary," he says. "It carries a bad spirit." Sharon's heart sank. What had they brought into their home? She whispered to herself. Sharon felt a growing unease after Jude's warning. That evening, she asked the children to sleep in her room while Mr. Benson stayed in the living room to keep watch. The house was oddly quiet, and the only sound they could hear was the occasional creaking of the floorboards and the rustling of the wind outside. Around midnight, Mr. Benson dozed off on the couch, and suddenly, a loud noise shook him awake. Panting and scared, he looked around but saw nothing out of place. Then he noticed that the star ornament is glowing brighter than before, casting sinister shadows across the room. He called out to Sharon, who came rushing in. "Something is wrong, Sharon. This isn't normal," he says, his voice shaky. Sharon nodded. Instincts was also telling her the same. They decided to contact Pastor Ezekiel, their family pastor, the next day for spiritual guidance. Pastor Ezekiel arrived at the Bensons' home early the next morning. He was a tall, elderly man with a calming presence. As soon as he stepped inside, he paused, his face grim. "There is a dark force here," he declared, pointing at the star ornament. "Where did you get this?" he asked curiously. The Bensons explained about the mysterious gift, and Pastor Ezekiel shook his head. "This is no ordinary gift. Someone has cursed it to bring chaos into your home. You must pray and seek God's intervention." The family gathered in the living room as the pastor led a series of prayers, sprinkling holy water around the house. The star ornament dimmed, but it didn't stop glowing entirely. "The evil is strong," Pastor Ezekiel says. "You must stay vigilant and avoid anger or fear, as these emotions can feed the curse." Across the street, Madame Juliana watched with frustration as the pastor left the Benson home. She hadn't expected them to seek help so quickly. Determined to ensure her plan succeeded, she consulted an herbalist she trusted. The herbalist gave her a stronger charm and instructed her to call upon a stronger force by burning some specific herbs near her house while chanting evil incantations. That night, Juliana followed the instructions. A dark cloud seemed to rise from her house and drift towards the Bensons' home. She smiled in satisfaction, unaware that her actions were being watched. Despite the pastor's prayers, the disturbances grew worse. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and an oddly cold wind blows constantly. Becky and Paul refused to sleep in their own rooms, and even Mr. Benson admitted he felt something was watching them. One evening, while everyone was gathered in the living room, shadowy figure appeared in the corner. It had no recognizable features, but exuded a menacing aura. Sharon screamed, clutching her children, as Mr. Benson shouted at it to leave. After a few seconds, the figure vanished, but its presence left everyone shaken. "We need more than prayers," Mr. Benson said, his voice firm. "We need to find out who sent this thing and why." The strain of the haunting began to affect the family dynamics. Mr. Benson spent more time at work, claiming he needed to focus on their safety, while Sharon grew more irritable and withdrawn. The children sensed the tension and became quieter, their laughter replaced with fear. Madame Juliana, seeing the cracks forming, felt victorious. She enjoyed the thought of the Bensons falling apart. However, she hadn't anticipated how much love and resilience the family had. Despite their struggles, they vowed to stick together and find a solution. Determined to uncover the truth, Sharon and Mr. Benson visited an elder in the community known for his wisdom. Elder Solomon listened intently to their story and nodded. "This kind of evil comes from someone close," he said. "You must find the source and confront it." Meanwhile, Becky found a small charm buried under their Christmas tree while playing in the garden. She showed it to Jude, the driver, who immediately recognized it as a marker for curses. "This was planted here intentionally," Jude said. The discovery of the charm under the Christmas tree left Sharon and Mr. Benson shaken. "Who could do this to us?" Sharon asked, her voice trembling. The charm was made of strange materials, including red threads and tiny animal bones. Elder Solomon's warning echoed in their minds. The source of the evil was someone close. They decided to question the staff at home, including the driver Jude, the housekeeper, and the cook. Though everyone denied involvement, a seed of suspicion began to grow, further straining the family's unity. That night, the disturbances intensified. Lights flickered wildly, and an unearthly wail echoed through the house. Sharon gathered the children in her room, holding them tightly as tears streamed down her face. Mr. Benson stood guard at the door, clutching a wooden pestle as if it would fend off the unseen threat. The air grew heavy, and the oppressive feeling of being watched consumed them. "This isn't just a curse," Mr. Benson murmured. "It's personal." Becky and Paul, though young, were observant. Becky remembered something strange about Madame Juliana's behavior on Christmas Eve. "She was staring at our house for a long time," Becky said to her parents during breakfast. Sharon froze, recalling the unsolicited gift Madame Juliana had sent. Though it seemed far-fetched, her intuition told her there was more to it. They decided to investigate discreetly, starting with asking Jude to keep an eye on Madame Juliana's activities. Meanwhile, Madame Juliana was growing impatient. Her stronger charm seemed to be working, but she hadn't achieved the complete breakdown she desired. One evening, Jude reported back to the Bensons. "I saw Madame Juliana burning something outside her house, chanting strange words. It wasn't normal," he said. Sharon and Mr. Benson exchanged knowing glances. The pieces were falling into place, but confronting Madame Juliana would be a dangerous move without proof. As the family grappled with their ordeal, an unexpected ally appeared. Elder Solomon paid them a visit, sensing their distress. He brought with him herbs, charms, and a protective staff, items said to ward off evil spirits. This is a battle of endurance and faith, he explained, arranging the items strategically around the house. You must also confront the source, he said, but only when the time is right. Until then, these will keep the worst at bay. The family found a sliver of hope in Elder Solomon's intervention. That night, for the first time in weeks, the weird noises and shadowy figures subsided. Though the air still felt heavy, there was a sense of safety within the walls of their home. The family held a prayer session led by Pastor Ezekiel, who joined them in their fight. God is on your side, he reassured them. Despite their struggles, the Bensons were determined not to let fear divide them. Madame Juliana, unaware of the Bensons' newfound protection, grew restless. Her hatred burned brighter each day as she saw their resilience. She sought the advice of her herbalist again, demanding a more potent charm. It's not working fast enough, she snarled. The herbalist, reluctant but bound by his craft, handed her a black amulet, warning her of the consequences. This will intensify the curse, but it could also rebound if their will is stronger than your hatred, he cautioned. That night, Madame Juliana activated the amulet, sending a dark wave of energy toward the Benson household. The result was immediate: loud banging on the walls, windows shattering on their own, and a suffocating heat that made breathing difficult. But as the chaos unfolded, the protective charms placed by Elder Solomon began to glow faintly, absorbing much of the dark energy. Madame Juliana's attack failed to break them, leaving her seething with rage and fear of retaliation. The night after Madame Juliana activated the amulet was tumultuous, but the Bensons endured. While the protective charms held back much of the energy, the family couldn't ignore the growing intensity of the attacks. We need to take control of this situation, Mr. Benson declared. The house still bore signs of the assault: cracked windows, fallen picture frames, and a lingering scent of burnt wood. Becky clung to her mother, whispering, "Mommy, when will it stop?" Meanwhile, Madame Juliana began to feel the toll of her own dark actions. Strange whispers haunted her in her sleep, and an unshakable feeling of being watched began to plague her every move. She tried to ignore the warnings, but her herbalist's words echoed in her mind. It could rebound if their will is stronger. Her resolve wavered as she contemplated whether to continue or retreat. Word of the Benson family's troubles began to spread across the neighborhood. Some neighbors speculated that their wealth had attracted spiritual attacks, while others whispered about Madame Juliana's peculiar activities. A divide formed within the community: those who sympathized with the Bensons and those who secretly hoped for their downfall out of envy. Mr. Benson decided it was time to address the village council, seeking advice and protection. He stood before the elders, recounting the strange occurrences. "We've been under attack since Christmas," he explained. While some elders expressed concern, others dismissed it as paranoia. Elder Solomon stood by the family, vouching for the authenticity of their claims. "This is no coincidence. Dark forces are at play," he said sternly. His warning resonated with the council, pushing them to promise intervention if things escalated further. One evening, as Sharon tidied the living room, a knock came from the door. Standing there was an unfamiliar elderly woman dressed in simple Ankara fabric. "I've come to help," she said softly, her voice carrying an air of authority. Introducing herself as Mama Adam, a spiritual guide, and she explained that she'd been sent by Elder Solomon after hearing of the family's struggles. "I have the gift of sight," she said. "Your enemy is closer than you think." Mama Adam placed cleansing items around the home and performed a quiet ritual. As she prayed, the atmosphere lightened and a faint, warm breeze swept through the house. Mama Adam then turned to the family, her expression serious. "You must remain united," she warned. "Division within will give your enemy more power." Her words struck a chord, as tensions had recently begun to rise among the family due to the stress of their ordeal. Madame Juliana's unraveling continued. Her nights were sleepless, filled with nightmares of shadows clawing at her soul. During the day, she became paranoid, jumping at every noise and avoiding her neighbors. Her attempts to maintain her composure were futile as her guilt and fear consumed her. One fateful evening, as she burned another concoction, she heard her herbalist's voice in her head, warning her of the rebound. Driven by desperation, she decided to visit her herbalist once more. "I want to end this," she admitted. But the herbalist shook his head, refusing to help further. "The path you've chosen is dangerous," he said. "I warned you of the consequences. It's out of my hands now." Madame Juliana left the shrine feeling powerless, knowing her actions had awakened forces she could no longer control. Becky and Paul had begun to show remarkable courage. They noticed the family's heavy reliance on spiritual help and decided to add their own effort. "Mommy always says prayers are powerful," Becky whispered to Paul. The siblings gathered in their room, holding hands and saying their innocent prayers with unshakable faith. Their prayers seemed to have an immediate effect. That night, when another attack began, this time with the sound of heavy footsteps on the roof, the noises suddenly stopped. Sharon, noticing the silence, entered the children's room and found them deep in prayer. Tears welled in her eyes as she joined them, realizing that their pure faith was a weapon stronger than any charm. The time had come for a direct confrontation. With Mama Adam's guidance, the Bensons prepared themselves for what was to come. "You must face your enemy and demand accountability," she advised. Sharon, though scared, felt a newfound courage growing within her. "This is about more than our family. It's about standing against evil," she said. The family prayed together, steeling themselves for the task. That evening, as dusk settled, they walked toward Madame Juliana's home. The street was awfully silent, with neighbors peeping from behind curtains, sensing the tension in the air. As they knocked on Madame Juliana's door, a deep sense of foreboding settled over the neighborhood. Would the confrontation bring resolution or escalate the chaos? Madame Juliana opened the door, her face pale and her eyes darting nervously. She hadn't expected the Benson family to confront her directly. "Good evening," Mr. Benson began, his voice steady but firm. "We know you're behind the troubles in our home." The words hung heavily in the air, and Madame Juliana was shocked. She tried to feign ignorance, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Sharon stepped forward, her voice filled with emotion. "Why, Madame Juliana? What did we ever do to you to deserve this hatred?" Juliana's guilt was evident, but she snapped defensively. "You people think you're better than everyone else," she spat. "You flaunt your wealth, your perfect family. It was time someone humbled you." The confession stunned the Bensons, but it also solidified their resolve to end the ordeal. Before the tension could escalate, Mama Adam stepped out from the shadows where she had been waiting. Her presence was commanding, and even Madame Juliana looked shaken. "Your jealousy has led you down a path of destruction," Mama Adam said sternly. "But the forces you've unleashed are not loyal to you. They are consuming you as we speak." Mama Adam began to chant, and a strange glow emanated from her staff. Juliana cried out as the truth of her actions became unbearable. Her strength crumbled, and she fell to her knees. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. The Bensons watched as Mama Adam revealed that the amulet Juliana had used now bound her to the dark forces, draining her life force with each passing day. In the silence that followed, Sharon stepped forward. Her heart was heavy with both anger and pity. "We could demand justice," she said with a steady voice. "But what good would it do to perpetuate hatred? We choose forgiveness over anything else." The words shocked Madame Juliana, who had expected punishment. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the family she had tormented. Mama Adam performed a final ritual to break the amulet's hold over Juliana and dispel the dark forces entirely. "You must leave this bitterness behind," she warned Juliana. "Envy will only destroy you." With the rituals complete, peace seemed to return to the Bensons' home, and Madame Juliana was left to grapple with her guilt. The Bensons' Christmas Day, though delayed, was celebrated with a newfound appreciation for life and love. The family gathered around the tree, exchanging gifts and sharing heartfelt stories. Becky and Paul presented handmade cards to their parents, declaring their love and gratitude. Sharon, with tears in her eyes, embraced her children. That evening, the family invited their neighbors to a small Christmas feast. To everyone's surprise, Madame Juliana also attended, her demeanor humble and her presence quiet. "Thank you for your kindness," she said softly to Sharon. Though forgiveness wouldn't erase the past, it marked a new beginning. As the festivities continued, the family sat together, reflecting on the strength they had discovered within themselves. The ordeal had tested their bonds, but also reinforced the love and unity that made them unbreakable. This Christmas, though marked by trials, became a story of triumph, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light and love can prevail.